Another draft physics video presentation. Lack of enthusiasm addition. Once again, hard to, difficult. Conventional physics and the minions who have bought into the wooey bullshit. And it's just wooey bullshit. A bunch of phantom particles doing phantom things, bent nothings, waves everywhere, blah blah. Somehow everything is connected to everything through the wave power or some kind of loop-de-doo bullshit that everybody wants to believe. And they pretend as if they've got some sort of credible argument and they've got some sort of big pile of credible evidence, and it's all a big pile of nonsense. It's kind of like religious people saying there are miracles, because there are coincidences, and there's going to be a certain number of coincidental events, and they're going to seem miraculous, but no, they're not miraculous, they're inevitable. All of this woo physics in a lot of ways can be just demonstrated to be fallacious in the sense that they're pretending that we don't know, again, like the rolling dice example, that we don't know that the dice actually travel through three-dimensional space, not bent space, and they actually hit surfaces, and there's actual physical mechanics that turn the dice, and the dice will end up a certain way because of real physics. And you can demonstrate it with like flipping a coin. All probability is just an illusion. There's just inevitable outcomes, and force out, force in, force out kind of thing. The forces are they all have a history, and they all have a future. All the forces, they never die, and that's the real universe. And again, you can demonstrate flipping a coin. I can flip it just careful enough, it always comes up heads. Now I can take the wave equation and apply it to that circumstance. And what am I applying it to? I'm applying it to a circumstance that has fewer variables. The wave equation doesn't predict anything until I give it all the information needed to predict. So it's all this hype, as if God did it, and God didn't do anything. Their mathematics didn't do anything. Their mathematics requires you to put a whole bunch of information in, and it'll give you some information out. But that's it. And so all I have to do is add a little bit more energy to the flipping of the coin, and I can create what might be the illusion of chance. The illusion that somehow there's a difference that is made out of something other than how hard I flipped the coin, and how much energy I put into it, and how many times I made it flip around in space to create the illusion, as if there was a choice being made. And there's no choice being made. There's physical mechanics. So here at the end of this is a Al-Khalili video, and it's the typical arrogance of physics, a lot of declarations about what the truth is. And so maybe I'll go back to the beginning and play some of the crap. He concedes that physics doesn't make much sense, in the sense that they got three different physics sciences. They got thermodynamics, they have quantum mechanics, and they have this bent space relativity crap, and there's no evidence of any compatibility between them. Doesn't make any sense. They have the same force moving the same speed, and in one, thermodynamics, they account for it. They have to account for it. They can never destroy the energy. In quantum mechanics, they have it going here and disappearing and popping back out of space somewhere, and vacuum magics, all kinds of loose ends. And bent space, it's got a gigantic loose end. It's just basically, they call it bent space, but in 3 dimensions, it's just a convergence. Converging into where? Going where? Where does the energy go? It's all going this way. It all goes to some point. Well, how does it get out of that point? And how does it get back to the outside again? So, I'll read a comment just because it's, so an asshole who can't even come up with a screen name, just leaves a period. Quantization of gravity, what does that mean? Okay, first off, how do they quantize something they don't concede exists? They don't believe it's energy. Okay, relativity is not an energy theory. It's a magic theory. The stuff just happens to move because the nothing told it to. There's no energy involved. So again, you have this whole creation destruction problem. Yes, it's conservative in the sense that if you close their little system of gravity, you can make it conservative because it takes just as much energy. You you benefit from as much wind going in as deficits you are trying to escape. But no other way is it conservative, and no other way does the gravity have a history? Does the energy have a history? It's just magic energy. It just shows up when you place the matter there, and all of a sudden the energy's there. So how do you quantize something that doesn't exist? So that's why I say, well, that doesn't mean anything, and that's what I went on to say in the real context of the statement. So then this translation, I'm too lazy to learn what physicists really believe. You can't even know what physicists really believe. So Al-Khalili admits that the physicists have all these different interpretations. New universes are created. The little bits have radar. What was the other one he mentioned? Was kind of funny because it wasn't one even I've heard of for quite a while. But anyway, you can't even describe the mechanics. The physicists can't, so I'm supposed to paraphrase what they believe accurately when they're not even consistent in their own understanding of what the mechanics is. But I'm going to go ahead and make 4,000 videos about how they're full of it. Well, I've made 4,000 videos pointing out how they're full of it. That's right. I've pointed out how the evidence says one thing. Their description of it is not accurate. They talk about detector experiments. Al-Khalili's done it that never were performed. They talk as if they've proven light is bent by gravity when they haven't even repeated with the same technology the most famous experiment related to the subject. And they haven't repeated it, and they have the opportunity to do it from space now, which is a huge advantage. I mean, can't even describe how big an advantage it is in creating a proof. It's such a huge advantage. I mean, it's a gigantic leap in terms of the quality of the experiment if it's done from space, and it costs almost nothing to do from space. All it needs is a decent camera that we already have up in space, and all they have to do is point it to the little bit of black space next to the sun and do the experiment. Why hasn't it been done? What's holding science back? So I've pointed out in these 4,000 videos that the double slit pattern isn't what the math predicts, and the single slit pattern certainly isn't rationally understandable. What creates the two waves? The magic two-wave creator? You don't have answers for a single one of my questions or any of the questions raised in the videos, and yet you pretend that you're not obligated. I'm obligated to answer questions. I'm obligated to make my theory match the evidence, but you're not. So it's just a huge double standard. You're obviously not after any kind of truth here. You're just a propagandist for the industry of, the religion of physics. Anyway, full of it, all while providing no tests. So again, he says, I just made a video 3 videos ago called Experiments. Well, in there is the description of the tests they haven't done that they should have done. The ones that will reveal the truth if they do the experiments. I mean, I've pointed out how you can prove the radar experiment has nothing to do with waves interfering with each other by just changing the shape of the experiment. So that's just a gigantic lie, providing no tests. No, there's lots of tests, and there's lots of experiments they just haven't done, because you don't have any curiosity about the facts, because you don't want the facts. You don't want it proven that the unicorn horn has been glued on to the horse. That's all you have. It's a little pony, and you glued a horn on it. And all of this is just a story you're telling, a little phantasmagorical fairy story, and you want to shove it in the mind of man and make it a permanent fixture because you want it to be true. Not because it is true, not because it's factual, not because it's scientific, not because it's intelligent, but because you want it to be the truth. You're just a religious fanatic. Okay, to disprove their tested theories. So again, you say there's tested theories. The whole point is where are your tests? Where have you proven that gravity bends light twice as much as any other object in the universe? Where have you proven with some sort of test that space is bent and that time is a dimension? All that's been demonstrated is that radioactive isotopes decay slower when they're given velocity. that being pushed through the ether, being pushed into force, changes their metabolism. Just like a human being's metabolism changes with these velocities. But just keep playing the game as if, no counter argument to any specific accusation I've made. Not a single answer to a single question I've asked. Just this crap. And that's all physics can provide. And all the physicists are clearly cowards. I can't pay them to have a conversation. Even if I'm willing to pay them, I ask them how much you want for 2 hours of your frickin' time. And they won't give me a price. I mean, that's a coward, frankly. Yeah. And so what do you have? I mean, I'm here. I'm willing to argue it. Again, nowhere in physics is there any accountability department, where they actually take account for whether they've been critiqued or ridiculed or challenged, and instead they just run from the challenge. You try it on any of the message boards, you can't raise any of these fundamental questions. They all run away. I mean, where's the evidence of your integrity? Oh, that's right, you don't have any evidence of this thing called integrity. You're afraid of the challenge. You haven't defeated the challenge. You're such a con artist, to pretend, well, I've defeated the flat earthers, therefore I've defeated all challengers. You go into the boxing ring and you beat up a midget, and then you sit there and talk about how you're the greatest fighter in the history of mankind. You haven't come close to fighting anybody who matters, anybody who could matter, anybody who's got a real argument. Not some other religious kook. Somebody with the evolution theory. Alright. So here he's going to answer this question. How do we know what we know? Saying that's the whole problem. They're so confident, this we know shit. And they won't admit that their evidence is incredibly weak and their theories are extraordinarily silly. I mean, they're extraordinary in their claim. Time as a dimension. Something you could wormhole your way to different places in time, because time is somehow a place. It isn't just a stupid function with a beginning and an end and no way to change any of it. Time's moving on a line, newsflash, and you're never, ever, ever going back, and you're never going forward unless you're asleep. Shit. You're sleeping through it. 6 lessons on how science works, and this will be just such an insult to the scientists of the past who knew their limitations, like Newton, who admitted, well, I could give you some kind of slop about what I think. He could have come up with some kind of, well, it's like a bent fabric, I mean, you think Newton didn't know what a bent fabric looked like, or he didn't understand the concept? He had never pulled a piece of rubber or a spring or something else to understand what tension was and how you could, tension would create a curve. Of course, he could have said something that stupid, but it's stupid because, he knew he couldn't make that three-dimensional. He knew that can't be what the universe is doing. It's a silly explanation.
Just giving you an idea, in fact, 6 lessons on how we know what we do know.
It's just, you know it because you want it, and that's it. There's nothing else happening here. You all sit in a table and you muse on imagined ideas, and whoever's the silliest wins. I mean, you're just clowns saying who's the funniest looking, because the standard really isn't what model is the simplest and the most mechanical and the most complete. And that's really not your standards at all.
I remember I gave the idea.
And again, it's just part of it's just desperation. We just don't have enough evidence. And they don't want to admit that. They're in such a hurry to provide the answer. They want to seem so much smarter. I'm the first that came up with the answer. I'm the first that came up with the answer. They're in such a rush to answer questions they don't have enough information to answer. I mean, here they're telling you what happened in the first milliseconds of the Big Bang. Like they figured out any of that shit. Like it's even plausible that they could get that answer right from this perspective. No chance at all.
of the ball dropping, and we know that it takes 1 second to fall 5 meters. How do we know what we know about the universe?
Yeah, that part you can know. You can know those things, but as soon as you start saying, well, I dropped 2 balls and I want to say they're entangled or something, 2 that you can't see, look, and the bottom line, look, it comes down to, what I've said in the other video. They have a lot of math that analyzes group behavior, and that's all they're saying. So it's like the flipping of the coin thing. They just say, instead of dealing with these individual events that are going to be dependent on individual variations in how much friction there is between my 2 fingers is really going to decide the equation. How deep I pushed into my finger, in terms of this flicking action. They're just going to pretend that each event is that they're all just the same event, and that each event has some kind of bizarre probability thing. Well, we know that, no, it's a bunch of individual events, just like you can know that when a water wave goes through a slit, that it matters where the water molecule is. If it's next to the surface or it's not next to a surface, it's going to move differently. There's a real physical environment that's going to dictate the outcome. And so they're taking these group of outcomes and saying, well, yeah, because there's a fact that there's water molecules going across the entire slit. The entire surface has different water molecules, and you can just add them all up and say, well, this one's going to go this way, and this one's going to go that way, and this way, and you can just turn it into a probability. But logically, it's not. The one that went through the middle did behave different than the one that went through the outside, the edge. And it's not just some random probability. And it's not a random probability when you throw dice and the dice bounce and they end up 6 and then they end up snake eyes and then they end up some other number. You know that each roll was inevitable and the physics dictated the outcome. It wasn't just some random thing.
How does science work?
Yeah, quality video, by the way. So this is the coronavirus version. So he's doing his little aid to humanity by selling his book, in this live room, crappy audio, shit manner. I mean, a lower quality video than my crappy videos. I'm not the Royal Institution. I don't have any money.
First of all, I would say science isn't just another ideology or belief system.
Yes, you can say it, but you're behaving just like religious people. You're saying there's this little tiny indication that God done it. It seems like God must have, right? The bad guy got squished by a piano. Oh, God, it was God's will. It's just so circumstantial and so convenient, and that's entirely what you're doing. You're just taking little tiny bits of indication of something. It seems like, it looks like, it seems like, it looks like. And you're just saying, okay, I'm not going to be a scientist. You're completely anti-science because you're not doing this scrutiny thing. You're not scrutinizing how you drew your conclusions. None of your conclusions are scrutinized. I'm providing the only scrutiny. You're doing none of it yourselves. None of you will be even honest enough to admit that the evidence is thin. It's not enough evidence for hard conclusions, but you're willing to just walk right into them. At least not for your conclusions, frankly. Other conclusions do seem, the evolution theory just seems, the more you look, the more you find it's the truth. And that's how it works with recognizing that this energy stuff is eternal. And that every piece of it, every movement has a history, and a history, and a history, and history, and history, and history. And it's been doing the same thing, this energy stuff, this force thing, for the entire existence of the universe. It's been just moving, and 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 moving. And it's just transferring that movement. Anyway, science is just not another ideology or belief system. Yes, it is.
Because science progresses based on what we call the scientific method.
Right, and you don't pay any attention to it. I mean, none of it. All of your biggest claims are the most unevidenced things there could possibly be, okay? You've done no precise documentation of any of it. So the Eddington experiment, your evidence for light bending is pitifully incomplete, contradictory, simple points could be raised. If gravitational lensing is happening, how come we're not seeing it where we should be seeing it? Simple question. There won't be any rational answer. Because there won't be an answer. And then you could just go on to all the other, like I said, the incompatibilities. You're the fact that you can't describe the phenomenon of wave interference without describing a bunch of experiments that never took place, a bunch of imagined experiments with imagined outcomes, nothing connected to reality. So there's no scientific method, there's no repeating experiments.
The scientific method requires us to our theory to be falsifiable, to be testable, to be repeatable. The experiments.
Again, that's really not the scientific method. The scientific method is that whatever evidence you do have, you make sure that at least that evidence has some credibility. So you make sure it wasn't just an error in the performance of the experiment, that some variable wasn't accounted for. Like, you did the experiment in a car and it was bouncing, and that's why the thing had an outcome. You validate what your theory is. Okay, so if your theory is you're measuring an energy that's 1/10,000th of the movement of you're measuring a distance 1/10,000th of the width of a proton, that if you're going to make such a claim, that you have some hope, even theoretically, of explaining how it's possible when you're bouncing the light off 1,600 mirror surfaces. And those mirror surfaces can never be one thin plane of surface. It'll never be that way. There's all kinds of mountains, so to speak, on the mirror, and you could hit the top of the mountain or you could hit the valley. How can you measure something? You're saying I'm measuring the height of a human being by shooting a beam into the earth back and forth, and you can't tell when you hit a mountain top or when you hit the valley. How could you measure the height of a human being if you can't even reliably know how deep you went into the mirror? I mean, these are huge theoretical problems, and you just take no account of it. You just pretend it's all great science. These are realistic and reasonable claims, when theoretically they're not. You have no theoretical explanation for the two patterns in the double slit experiment. And yet you keep pretending your math perfectly predicts the outcome when it doesn't. It says there's going to be a bright light in a place where there's no light. That's what your mathematics predicts. It fails to predict the outcome. And you lie. You just sit there and overtly lie about what the experiments have proven or demonstrated or shown. And you don't even do some of them, like Stern-Gerlach. You say the Stern-Gerlach experiment where you're shooting silver atoms through a magnetic field, and you say this has something to do with electron spin, that somehow you're shooting electrons through the experiment. They'll illustrate the experiment by showing electrons going through the experiment when they've never done it with electrons.
It has to be repeated in order to prove a phenomenon.
There you go. Repeated would be a great thing. That's right. It'd be really good to validate that whoever says I did it, they actually did do it. So that would be a nice thing to do, is to make sure you can in some other way corroborate the outcome.
Or to confirm a particular theory. A good scientific theory has to make predictions. It can't just...
All right, well, this prediction thing doesn't mean too much. I mean, you're obviously predicting what the physical reality is. So yes, you're predicting how thick the chalk is, or how dense it is, or something, and then you do some experiments to validate the prediction. That should be the way it predicts. Predicting what we already know to exist, and saying, well, my model gets the same outcome. So I made a car with square wheels, and the car got to the grocery store, and therefore I can say the square wheel car is the best explanation. When no, the round wheel car probably is a better explanation. I mean, the fact that you can loosely fit some circumstances doesn't mean you have the right answer. You have to challenge. You have to validate with more dense evidence than it looks a little bit like the right answer.
Say yes, that's the number that you should have got when you got that experiment after you've done the experiment. It should predict that if you do this experiment or you carry out that observation, this is what you'll get.
Well, yeah, it should be dependable in that sense, but again, as I just pointed out, none of your important theories have that kind of credibility. Even these little simple experiments. Imagine if they can cheat so much on the simple experiments, right? Say their math perfectly predicts when it doesn't, on something as simple as the two-slit experiment, and yet you're going to trust them when, like, for example, Alan Aspect says, I shot a photon here, and 15 meters over here, I detected the exact same photon. You know, I mean, these are extraordinary claims that should be seen as being incredible as they're stated. If that's the assumption of your experiment's probably flawed somehow, because you're probably not doing what you claim to be doing. Even the idea that the particles are in some way entangled, when it's logical to say, no, one of them is polarized, they have a different phase. Two particles come out of a system, and they're at a different phase because the system that's creating them is going like this. Right? It's creating a photon going this way, and it's creating a photon going that way. Well, they're obviously in opposite phase. Obviously. This versus this. Amazing.
So there are certain rules and criteria that are what we now call the scientific method.
Right, and again, it has no meaning to theoretical physics, and it certainly has no meaning in the context of what we as professional physicists are going to call our doctrine, our Bible. You haven't scrutinized that Bible with any scientific method whatsoever. You're not admitting where the evidence is insanely weak.
And that lifts the edifice of science and physics in particular above other ideologies.
Okay, so I mean, the proof will be when it's found to be completely wrong. Okay, just like, all kinds of mistakes have been made. So they claim this atomic model where they have the electrons spinning around. They don't have hard evidence that the electron's spinning anywhere or moving at all. A magnetic model of positions works just fine to explain the structure of an atom. So if all of this is demonstrated eventually in the future to be all a pile of shit, what's going to be your penalty? I mean, can we tear all your statues down? You're just so arrogant to claim that you care about the scientific method when clearly all you care about is propagandizing and way overstating the credibility of your science, because it doesn't have any. Yeah, it should be back. Looks like it. Yeah, pretty much. So anyway, continuing.
And belief systems. Secondly,
yeah, great.
How do we know what we know? Well, it's because it's okay for us to make mistakes.
Okay, you say that. What does that even mean? Where if you're conceding these mistakes? Again, there's absolutely no willingness to discuss any of these hard conclusions you've drawn about reality. You've got your electrons now moving in spaces where they don't even have a position anymore. You've Heisenberged everything. What if that's a huge mistake? You don't account for it. You don't sit there and think through it and say, well, what if we're wrong? You won't even fix things like the plus and minus being wrong, which screws up your mathematics and ends up having current going in the opposite direction of the voltage. So you don't fix anything even when you know it's a mistake. And it's clearly a mistake to think that this force stuff that's all moving the same speed is somehow bent space moves at the same speed as quantized energy. What sense does it make to sit there and draw that conclusion as a hard conclusion when what it's obviously screaming is these are the same things? You can't sit there and come up with some reasonable explanation for how two fundamentally different things are moving at exactly the same speed.
Can you imagine a politician admitting a mistake, saying, well, I was wrong about that, I've changed my mind?
Well, where is this admission? I mean, again, they just keep trying to re-engineer bad conclusions and force them to be right ones, and that's what the evidence is. That's why there is dark energy and dark matter. Not because you admitted a mistake in how you're figuring out what gravity is. No, you're trying to make your wrong theory correct by creating invisible men who come to the rescue. A magical force that saves the day. What else is going on here?
Because I've been given some new evidence, and now I'm going to do this. They will try and make it sound like, oh, no, I never thought that. I always said this. In science, we are not embarrassed.
Where's the, again, it's just hilarious that he brings this up. Where is the evidence of these concessions being made that you might be wrong? Where? There's no evidence of it. Again, you keep saying that you've proven that photons are bent by gravity, and your proofs stink.
Admit our mistakes, because that's how we move forward. If we arrogantly stuck with what we believed in, if we didn't have...
Yeah, and how haven't you done that? We're really back to ether theorists, right? They were ether theorists back in Newton's time, and that's all you've done is renamed, relabeled the ether. And, so now nothing's nothing. I mean, all the something is now some sort of nothing until something sees it or something has an interaction with it or something. Look, the moon doesn't exist until some asshole looks at it, to use an Einstein joke. I mean, it's pathetically any admissions. You won't even admit the obvious, which is you don't have enough evidence for your hard conclusions.
Have an open mind. We would never develop.
You shouldn't be saying what we know. You should be saying what we theorize as a probable solution to the problem. And even that would be saying too much, because you have no reason to think it's even probable. Your answers are so bad. So extraordinary. Extraordinary claims, less than ordinary evidence. That's the facts of physics.
We'll never replace old theories with newer, more accurate ones. So admitting our mistakes is valuable in helping us persuade people that this is how we know what we know.
Again, it's just hilarious. Where have they admitted any of these mistakes? They just keep piling on to them. Again, they find out some more information about electrons, and it just doesn't quite add up to this, little orbiting electron doesn't quite work. And so what do they have it now? They have it in these silly loop-de-doo patterns that don't have any geometric rationality. It's completely irrational. There's no reason for the electron to be in any of those positions or to be curved in any of those lines. There's no force to keep it there. Let's see. Scientific theory has to be falsifiable. So again, more crap. No, it doesn't. I mean, it's nice, if you have some sort of evidence to be able to apply to the circumstance, but there's circumstances where we just can't see it, and so all you can do is model it. And then all you can do is say, is the model consistent with the outcome, and is the model simple, and is the model rational and reasonable? But that's all you're ever going to have, because you're never going to falsify it, because you're never going to see the object, like a photon.
Then a scientific theory, as I mentioned, I think has to be falsifiable. I don't know. For those of you who follow me on Twitter, I had a bit of a Twitter stream. It wasn't a rant. I think it was a Twitter thread.
But none of this is, again, there's no falsifiability to all your magical forces, the bent of space. How is it a falsifiable theory? How do I falsify the existence of some magical stuff that tells stuff where to go? There's no falsifiability for any of this crap. Certainly not for dark energy or dark matter, these magical entities that do these magical things.
Linking, talking about these conspiracy theories linking the coronavirus to G5 networks. I'm not even going to go there. Rubbish.
Oh, so again, let's argue with the craziest whack jobs in the universe instead of the ones who would point out how, no, all of your suggested solutions to problems are frankly in the category of non-falsifiable magic. You don't even know what a charge is. It's just, the electric field. What the hell is that? It's a non-falsifiable magic field of who knows what doing who knows what. I mean, you won't even concede that the field is actually created by objects that are doing something. That light makes the field of photons. The light bulb does it. The field didn't go from nowhere, didn't come from nowhere. It's got an actual source.
So I was trying to make the comparison between scientific theory and a conspiracy theory. A scientific theory is falsifiable. You can, in the light of new evidence, you can prove it's wrong. A conspiracy theorist, no matter.
So again, new evidence. So you're never going to get any new evidence to prove there's no dark matter. Somebody could just make up the fact that there's some kind of magical dark thing sitting there anytime they want to, and then you can just say it turns on and off. There's dark matter. It just isn't on right now. So it looks like it's nothing because it's not on. Antiparticles, all this stuff is completely, there's not enough evidence to do anything. You can't make it true or false because you don't have enough evidence to draw any conclusion.
So what evidence you give them, they will twist it and use it to make to support their theory.
That's all you've done. That's right. That's all you've done. You quote mine the experiments to say what you've proven. Again, like they quote mine the radar experiment or microwave experiments in general. And you just don't show the reverse. So you don't show people the two-slit pattern and show that, our math completely fails. This stupid diagram of two intersecting waves won't produce this pattern. Just won't do it. So our theory is fundamentally not accurate. But we'll say it's the most proven theory in the history of mankind. And we'll say you wouldn't have an iPhone without us having this wacky wave theory. And it's just crap. It's not the truth. It's not how everything actually did happen, how all these things actually did get invented. They didn't get invented because you came up with a theory, of how quanta works. No, it got invented because people spent years and years and years grinding crap up and mixing different chemicals and seeing if they could get the thing to disperse heat a little bit better and do this a little better. Again, it took them 30 years to invent the blue LED, And it wasn't because they had a theory and they just, said, we have the theory here of how it works, and so now we can just apply it and create a mechanical device that works. Didn't work that way. Didn't happen that way. Your theory didn't create it. Your theory wasn't the solution to the problem.
Or they will dismiss it altogether. A proper scientific theory is one where you can prove it wrong. You can knock it down and kill it and replace it with something better.
Well, again, that's not going to happen. The something better part, yes. But it's really hard to prove something, again, that we can't see. We can only model it. We can only sit there and put what pieces we think are in place and say, does it reliably produce the right outcome? And again, their model of wave interference doesn't produce the right outcome. The single slit still remains unexplained. Why are there two waves? There's no mechanical reasoning. There's no mechanical reasoning. None. And likewise, there's no mechanical reason. Well, why is the two-slit pattern the wrong pattern? Your theories, you're saying it's one thing. I'm saying, well, their model doesn't work. So why aren't you conceding? Yes, the model is flawed. And instead, you're saying it's complete nail-in-the-coffin evidence. You've proved it by getting the wrong result. So what can be argued here? You're so dishonest and despicable. You just propagandize. You just pretend. You just ignore the fact that you never did these detector experiments, and you just keep saying what the detector does. Oh, what happened when we did the detector experiment? Well, nothing happened because you didn't do it.
Fourthly, scientific results have to be reproducible. It's no good coming up with a theory and saying, well, that's it. Well, you have to repeat it. Many years ago when I was doing my PhD.
Yeah, well, many years ago when you were doing your PhD, did you think about the Eddington experiment and say, gee, it's been like 100 years. Why doesn't somebody redo this experiment the right way? Because Eddington's own journal says, I wouldn't stake my life on these results. Because, in fact, he got 10%. The photographs were 10% of what he was hoping for. 10%. He was hoping for 10,000 stars in the image. He got 1,000. That's how bad, it was in terms of doing the experiment, conducting the experiment. It was just really bad luck, bad weather, bad circumstances. And they got shitty photographs. And it's just the truth. They're shitty compared to their expectations. They were crap compared to their expectations. Much lower quality than they were hoping for. Much, much lower, we could even say. And yet you write New York Times headlines based on that one experiment. One time, one single experiment, one single advocate who scrutinized the results. So because one person who liked Einstein validated Einstein. I mean, the bias is even so clear. The guy clearly was there to validate Einstein. He wasn't there because he wanted to prove Einstein wrong. So it wasn't any of this idea that, you had an objective or even an adversarial contest. You sat there and had a guy on your side with really crappy results telling you Einstein right. Just like LIGO has a whole bunch of self-invested people who are highly invested in their fake theory, telling you we did it. Did somebody else tell them they did it? Did somebody scrutinizing it say they did it? No, there was no one saying they did it. It was just them saying we did it. With a theory that doesn't make any sense. With claims of what they have accomplished that don't make any sense. Where did Einstein say you could convert matter into bent space? Where was that theory ever scrutinized?
PhD, there was a discovery of something called cold fusion, the idea that two electrochemists had discovered nuclear fusion on a tabletop. That would have been the holy grail of giving us fusion energy, unlimited energy, solving the world's energy problems. Well, no one could repeat those experiments. And so that idea died a death.
Right. And so, again, what experiments have you done where you've demonstrated that to happen? Where did you repeat the Eddington experiment with commensurate technology? You've had 120 years to do it, and you haven't done it? Well, 100 years. Why haven't you done it? And you have all this technology in space. Nobody was inspired to do the experiment. You can do it so much cheaper and so much more reliably from space, and never done. Is there some explanation?
Not because there was a conspiracy.
I mean, you're clearly not horny to prove or demonstrate by redoing experiments. You just don't redo them, do you? No. Has anybody actually redone the Allen aspect experiment that proved entanglement must be?
Against them, it wasn't sort of like the Goliath of big, the poor David fighting against Goliath, and big corporate interest silenced these two heroic scientists. They'd made a mistake, and no one else could repeat the experiment because actually what they had done was wrong. There was no such thing as cold fusion. So experiments and results have to be reproducible by others before we believe them.
Well, that's not your rule. So again, that's just a lie. Okay, that's not your rule because you haven't repeated the Eddington experiment. It hasn't been done.
So that adds credibility, credence to how we know what we know. Choosing doubt over certainty. Scientists, unlike politicians.
I mean, just what a joke. I mean, these are funny. I mean, almost comical lines. Choosing doubt over certainty. How do we know what we know? I mean, it's hilarious. Where's this indication that you have any doubt when you tell us what the Big Bang was, what this was, the universe is expanding? Every claim you make is not made with any doubt indicated at all. Well, we could be wrong. We just have a theory, it's just some sort of mush we put together, just spitballing. Well, where's the evidence that you have any caution whatsoever in your hyperbole, in your exaggeration? He does it right in this video. I could play the clip where he does you wouldn't have anything. You wouldn't have a cell phone, and you wouldn't have a TV, and you wouldn't have a this, and you wouldn't have a that if it wasn't for quantum mechanics, which is just insane exaggeration.
Always have doubts. Now, you'll have heard in the news when in the daily press conferences when the journalists are asking the science advisors to the politicians, when is this going to happen? When are we going to know? When are we testing? And they say we don't know. We don't know yet. We don't have enough evidence. That is the essence of good science.
Oh no, well that's the essence of failure. Frankly, I mean, it's almost something you could just pop the data into the computer and it could figure out your probability streams. Just tweak a variable here, tweak a variable there, and you can see all kinds of outcomes. So this is one where they should be able to give you pretty reliable information, frankly. There's certainly been enough case study, and the fact that you can't even do that coherently, is just shame on science.
Have doubts, to have uncertainty, not to say I am sure. Now, a lot of people think that's a weakness. You know, oh, if you're not sure about this, how can I believe anything you say? Well, science isn't about being sure, because then, you know.
Yeah, so again, where do they indicate any of this doubt? Where in any of this propaganda, this whole video, he's telling me what physics says. It doesn't indicate that, well, yeah, we could be wrong about every single one of these assertions I'm going to be making, because none of them are hard evidence proven. None of them are the theory of evolution. None of them have volumes and volumes of corroborating evidence, evidence from different places, geology, biology, genetics, microbiology, blah, blah, blah. No, you don't have any of that here. You have little shreds of seems like. The two slit seems like wave interference. It's you know, it's on-off. You know, isn't that the same thing? Isn't being an on-off pattern mean it has to be wave interference, right? The simplest pattern in the universe can only happen from one thing, right? Only one thing could create the simplest pattern in the universe.
You would never want to change your mind. Again, you know, you wouldn't want to admit your mistakes. You wouldn't want to allow your theory to be falsified. Just to be rigorous enough that if you come up with new evidence, you remove that theory and replace it with a better one.
You don't even need new evidence. You can even just use the old evidence. So again, they take an experiment like Stern-Gerlach. I mean, you know, you can just keep saying it. And they're making all these extrapolations about how electrons are functioning when it's atoms that are going through the experiment. They're ions. They're not electrons. So why are they telling us what electrons are doing when they're not even putting electrons through the experiment? You know, all the other, you know, the cathode ray tube, it's completely dependent on how much gas you put into the you know, the evacuation isn't complete. The radiometer, I mean, all these things are based on nuances and subtleties that you're not paying any attention to at all. So there's all kinds of indications that you could be wrong, and you may well be wrong in your conclusion, because the outcomes aren't as black and white as you would claim them to be. It's nothing like nail in the coffin evidence, yet you keep saying it is.
My final point is one that is an interesting one, because I don't know whether all physicists would agree with me on this, but that is that just because a mathematical theory is beautiful, or it's simple, or it's elegant, doesn't...
So more of this bullshit about some sort of elegant math, and everything they say is elegant isn't too elegant to me. I mean, what do you mean? The shapes are pretty? The little forky thing is a pretty shape? I mean, what do you mean there's something elegant in the math? It's really not there. Again, the symbols represent a whole different kind of equation you have to do, you know, so there's no simplicity in the math, frankly. 2 plus 2 is pretty simple, but, you know, and even, like I said, the simplicity of their errors, you know, to sit there and play this game that momentum is the same thing as frequency, when we have separate words for the two things because they're separate phenomena. They're not the same thing. You can't make one into the other because they're not the same thing. And yet you've made them equivalent and then pretended that everything that has momentum has a frequency when it clearly doesn't.
Mean it's the truth. Now, over the past century or more, we actually have found a lot of fundamental truths about the universe from beautiful theories. You know, people like Paul Dirac and
oh, see, more nonsense. I mean, Paul Dirac at the time was not very well respected or highly respected because it all seemed quite convoluted. And so now in hindsight, you're saying, oh, it was so brilliant to come up with that anti-particle nonsense. When, yes, they haven't proven the existence of any of these things, anti-particle crap. Again, tiny amounts of evidence. And all based on it, like I said, the first, you know, there was one guy who got credited with finding the positron. There was a whole bunch of guys who had already done the same experiment. And that they figured it was a proton. Okay, they figured, it's a proton. Proton snuck through. And the only reason why they say it's a positron is because they have certain expectations about how fast a proton can go and how well it can go through a piece of lead and all that kind of stuff. And if those calculations are wrong, if those assumptions are wrong, then it is just a proton. So it really just depends on what assumptions were applied. So the first 5 guys saw protons. And the one guy saw positron. Same experiment, same results, different interpretation, and that's all you have. So positrons exist because one guy said, I'm going to call it a positron. I'm going to say Dirac was right. When the other guy said, no, I don't need to do that. I mean, that's jumping to a conclusion. I don't need to make a new particle out of this. I can just, call it what it looks like. It looks sort of like a proton. It doesn't look like anything else.
Others developed beautiful mathematical structures, mathematical theories, mathematical equations, and they trusted them. And they said, this must be how the world works, because look at my equation, look how pretty it is. And sure enough, nature behaves in that elegant way.
No, there's just nothing elegant about creating antiparticles for everything. There's nothing elegant in that. That's ugly as hell. So this is just like people telling you how pretty babies are or something. I don't have to believe that. Okay, you can believe it, but I don't have to believe it. I mean, compared to cute kitty, ugly baby don't make it.
But it's dangerous to follow that line too far. Not everything in the workings of the universe is simple.
Oh, yeah. Well, the simple part, I think, is I think I can nail you with a logical argument that the reductionism requires simplicity on the way down. So unless you really are a God botherer and thinks the elemental function is some sort of sophisticated function, it really doesn't work. Evolution doesn't work that way. It moves. Complexity has a history, and the history is always something simpler, not something more complicated. And that's going to be the reality, and that's reasonable physics, in my opinion. I think you're stepping outside the bounds of reasonable when you say somehow complexity just poofs.
Sometimes it's just hard.
Or that complexity can exist and yet go backwards in terms of its evolution. The complex systems with complex elements can create somehow simple outcomes. Not likely.
And a lot of the problems in physics today and some of the mysteries that are still remaining, I suspect it's going to take some effort to resolve them. Because we're not going to say, yes, of course, that's how it is.
Well, you're not going to resolve them because the conflict they have is fundamental. In one place you have energy conservation, and the other place you don't. And you're not going to mix those two systems. One of them has to be right and one of them has to be wrong. Or they're both wrong. And I think you've got them both wrong.
This is my theory of everything. We were missing this. I don't think another Einstein's going to come along and say, this is the simple thing you're missing.
So again, yeah, Einstein is such an ironic example. Just because Einstein's mush explanation for gravity is just that, mush. It's a wooey religious theory. It is spooky action. The nothing tells the something what to do. I mean, that is about as spooky as you can get. He doesn't even have a real spook. There's not a real ghost doing the ghostly act. It's just some magical thing that just magically happens.
Here you are. Here's your theory of everything, your theory of quantum gravity. I think it's more complicated than that. It may even be that we require artificial intelligence to help us.
Oh, what a joke. That's just so funny. I'm sorry. It's just, this idea that artificial intelligence can do something. All it can do is the tedious stuff faster than we can. But that's it. It can't do the what really is required, which is to analyze the different models and figure out where they succeed and fail. That kind of stuff has to be programmed into it. It has to be able to see the difference between bullshit and real shit. And that requires a program. And we have to put that program in. And it's no different than the same one we can use with our own brains. So it's not going to help you any.
Solve some of these problems, because artificial intelligence will be able to see patterns in the complexity of our equations, our mathematics that we
So more crap. No, you'll see the errors in them, the overt ones. Your theory doesn't work. The computer or the artificial intelligence will look at your analysis of the two-slit experiment and say it doesn't work. The two waves don't do that. So it doesn't work.
Humans are unable to see.
Whatever. So, yeah, maybe I'll just leave it at that. I don't know if there's any point in just, I mean, he's just hyping his book. So he's written a new book, and it's, that's all he's doing, taking advantage here, pretending I'm an educator when all he's doing is selling a book. And it's just all string theory versus quantum field theory or something, blah, 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 blah. Just all crap. So maybe I'll leave it at that, yeah. I mean, you got to feel enough of it right there. I mean, we just randomly pop in here.
The roof of a house, say 5 meters high.
So he made a joke about a friend told him after reading his book that he should have called it The World According to Jim Al-Khalili instead of The World According to Physics. Because clearly this is just his own wacky version of physics. It's not physics as proven, it's just physics as he wants it to be.
Theory of relativity, and we have the whole of...
All right, and then they always bring up these things like all the physicists believe that the end for physics was in sight, because a couple of physics speculated on how well we've answered most of the questions that matter, and the rest of the questions aren't going to lead to anything miraculous. I mean, we kind of can see the dimensions of the physical world, forces and matter and sizes, and we sort of answered all those questions. We don't really need any new particles. But they keep adding them, for no good reason. I suppose they'll be satisfied now that they have their Higgs boson, but they still have a convoluted model that doesn't make any goddamn sense. 400 little particles, all having their own antiparticle, all interacting in their own field of some sort of fieldiness. This magical field that only affects electrons, and a magical field that only affects positrons, and a magical field that only affects protons, and a magical field that only for tau muons, and it's just on its face it's ridiculous. All right, so whatever. So depressing. It's this stupid chart where he combines things and says, oh yes, we've unified this and that. We unified this and that. And he didn't unify anything yet. There's nothing unified in your theory because you haven't recognized that all the forces are the same thing. It's all the same stuff, moving the speed of light. It's little bits of momentum, and you can organize the little bits in different kinds of arrangements. You can have them in like marching soldiers. I can have 1,000 soldiers, and I can put the 1,000 soldiers in rows, 100 soldiers at a time, and I can make the rows round, and I can do all kinds of different things with these soldiers and put them in different configurations, but it's just soldiers. And that's all there is. And, well, frankly, there's soldiers that are wearing blue shirts and red shirts, but it's just soldiers. And everything can be explained as just where did the soldiers go? They went here, they hit this, they pushed that, and then they went somewhere else, and they went somewhere. The soldiers never sleep, so the soldiers just keep going somewhere. Just follow the soldiers, and you'll see things happen. Soldiers make things happen. They make matter move. If matter's moving, it's because soldiers are moving it. The end. That's physics. That's going to be eventually understood to be the truth. And it's unfortunate that, like the truth of evolution, much of the human race doesn't want to hear the truth. Sad fact. So, till the next time and such. Eh.